Okay, we're going to call this special work session of May the 25th, 2017 to order. And tonight we're going to be considering a presentation and discussion regarding local regulation of small cell facilities located within the public right-of-way. That's all we're going to talk about. We're not going to drift over into anything else tonight. So who's going to?
Vernon? And we are just really delving into the issue for the first time and want to give you an overview and just start you thinking about how this might work in our community in terms of from a functional and a regulatory standpoint. And it's a new aspect of the potential use of our right-of-way. So let Vernon take you through that. And Shauna's here, Paul's here. We have, I think, some other interested parties too who may want to speak to it. But our primary goal tonight is to just inform you and give you a chance to start thinking about this issue.
Thank you, Mayor, Alderman. I also want to say, because we have a joint Planning Commission Bowman workshop at 6 p.m., we do want to leave here about 10:02 to make sure we get over there and give those applicants sufficient time to present. Just a little bit of history, and I'm going to go through a very quick presentation. Some of the guests that have joined us this evening represent providers of small cell facility networks, and they may want to address you, and you may have some questions for them as well as us. Over the last several months, we've been receiving a number of requests for small cell facilities to be placed within the right-of-way, and you can see a couple pictures of what those small cell facilities look like. A couple months ago, we met with a fair number of installers and companies that provide wireless network services to get their input on this proposed draft ordinance. So let's start off and talk, what are small cell wireless facilities? The facilities are nodes and antennas that are becoming an increasingly popular way to expand coverage and increase network capacity. With mobile data traffic expected to double annually, providers have indicated that small cell facilities are necessary to expand the capacity of wireless networks for both residents and our business partners. What are some key elements of the proposed ordinance? Well, we hope, and we've tried to do the best we can to cover, make sure it complies with applicable FCC regulations. Thank you. I turn it because I do talk a little bit loud. There's no discrimination upon providers. Requests will be processed within a reasonable time period, essentially first in and first out once we get a complete application. In the ordinance, we have identified staff reasonable height, size, and separation criteria. The ordinance includes a right-of-way agreement template that we would enter into a right-of-way agreement with entities looking to install those facilities. And the majority of the applications would be administered administratively based on the criteria included in the ordinance, except within planned unit developments, residential planned unit developments, where we would want the Planning Commission to provide that approval authority. So essentially, the facilities are the nodes and antennas, and here's 3 of many examples placed on top of poles or on sides of buildings. The next series of pictures just gives you some examples of what they look like. And I can come back to them later in the discussion, of course. Okay. So what are some of the proposed standards that are included in the ordinance that other communities have developed similarly? First of all, encourage the small cell facilities to be mounted on existing buildings on private property or on streetlight poles. And we've communicated with Middle Tennessee that the streetlights would be an opportunity to install the facilities, again, the nodes and antennas. The power poles, not so much so. Those are used for fiber cable and other electrical transmission lines. New small cell support structures, essentially the poles and facilities. The facilities placed on top of those poles would be allowed to be 6 feet above any existing utility poles within the right-of-way located within 500 feet of the proposed installation, or no taller than 40 feet above the adjacent grade. New cell facilities placed on existing poles would not exceed 10 feet above the existing pole or wireless support structure that's already there. And we would encourage co-location wherever possible. So just to give you an idea, and these are pictures from the city of Franklin now. You may have seen along Carruthers, Liberty Pike, some of the new traffic camera poles that we have installed. And those are about 50 feet tall, okay? There's another picture. Here's a picture of an antenna at one of our intersections at 96 and Royal Oaks, where there's a small antenna on top of the traffic signal support.
With those poles already there? All
Yeah,
of
they're
those,
there now.
they're
Yeah.
existing?
And there
Okay.
are our poles, the traffic camera
Yeah,
poles.
and then they're above, they
Right.
just are placed above it.
Yes, and then I want to go back to this one on the left. You can see some existing streetlights next to the pole, although it doesn't give you perhaps the best orientation, just given the angle of the picture. So, what, the last thing I want to leave you with is that, again, we wanted to share this with you to get your input, but also to give an opportunity for the folks joining us today that may want to address you and talk about their experiences in other communities. These wireless networks are important. They're becoming the wave of the future for communication, for, again, citizens and businesses. And we're trying to provide a reasonable way to make sure Franklin stays current with its technology. Shauna and Paul, Emily, had a lot to do with developing this ordinance as it's drafted. We realized there are going to need to be some tweaks to it before we formally bring it forward, but this is the first step in that process. Shauna, do you have anything else at this point? Or Paul?
What's the downsides to not doing this?
Dropped cell coverage, mostly that. So right now, I think that they want to focus in on Cool Springs area, which is where they're seeing Wi-Fi and cell coverage being dropped. And this would help benefit citizens that are coming through the area and also businesses.
What do you mean they're being dropped?
Went through ditch spots.
You just
Yeah.
can't get it?
Yeah, you just can't get it. You can't get where you need. And I think that they can address a lot of
So
what,
there's
the
really no
need.
negatives, it's
Well-
positives, right? I mean,
Well-
That's,
Well,
The concern of staff is basically the aesthetics.
what it
okay,
looks like.
okay.
And I would echo that. Take a look at the picture on the right, and that's along Carruthers.
Yeah.
And to place, and I'll give you, hopefully my figures and memory are correct. As you can see in this area, there's underground utilities, okay? And installing a pole or more poles adds to, the pollution of the visual view sheds. To install underground utilities 1 mile, it's about $2 million. So that's a big investment, because when you install overhead utilities in that same mile, is probably less than $150,000. So we and our businesses, property owners, have made a big investment in creating a certain character of our community that's very desirable. But they all need communications.
And we've also seen places where they didn't get ahead of it, and places where some poles have been placed in the right of way that are 150 feet tall. So we really have an interest in getting in front of it, creating some guidelines for staff, and for you and for the citizens and the applicants to understand what we're doing.
These pictures are in commercial areas along pretty busy thoroughfares. So I don't think 40 feet is going to make that much difference. But in a neighborhood, an existing neighborhood, especially with underground utilities, 40 feet is going to make a big difference in what that neighborhood looks like. Now, there's a wide variety. What?
You what?
I don't find them very pretty at all.
What?
Yeah.
There's a wide variety of streetlights in our neighborhoods now. Like our current streetlights that have the glass dome on top, this wouldn't work on them at all. So that means they'd have to put up their own poles, right? So do we not worry that 40 feet might be too tall in existing neighborhoods?
40 feet's tall.
And why is 40 feet important?
Well, I've seen some that are just on the side of the buildings in some of the
Okay.
pictures, and so I think that's a great question, is why is 40 feet so important? Is it because 40 feet, you don't have to place them but every such a distance, but if you put them at 20 feet, you have to put them closer?
Well, at
Is
this
that the
height,
deal?
it's still going to make a difference on the topography.
I'm talking about just
If-
on buildings.
Well, but if there's a ridge, if there's a ridge and it's only 40 feet tall, you're not going to get coverage on the other side of the ridge anyway, you know?
I do want to try to respond because it was well thought out, is that our existing streetlights generally are somewhere between 30, 35, maybe push 40 feet. So that's where that
Not my
came
neighborhood.
from. And again, our traffic cameras are 10 feet taller, and if they're painted black instead of gray, you know, they blend in differently. That's what we tried to show in the pictures.
So aren't we, and I don't minimize this, aren't we talking more about the placement on existing poles? So is it, there,
That's your preference.
that's the preference?
But you may have some new constructed or proposed new constructed ones and how you want to deal with the addition of structures in the right of way.
Okay.
Now, go back to that, it said 40 feet
From-
from grade or?
Yeah, from where? Where do you start measuring 40 feet?
Is 40 feet all that important a discussion right at this particular time? And I'm not trying to minimize anybody's it is
It
that
is.
important?
Let me see if I can get to the one, I'm sorry. Here, I want to go to
Because
that
if
one.
you
Yes,
got
the
a-
40 feet would be measured from the grade. What are showing or illustrating in the photograph that's on the left is, again, a street light that's approximately 35 feet and a 50-foot tall traffic camera that we have.
So we currently
The
have
perspective
those.
though on that picture,
Is skewed, yes. It is definitely skewed based on the
because it
angle
looks
of
like
the
it's
camera.
twice as tall,
Right,
actually.
and it's in the foreground,
Yeah.
Because the old Cobra lights and lights like that, those aren't 30 feet tall.
There, most of the streetlights that we're doing out there on Crothers or McEwen are around 30, and most of your traffic signal poles that have a additional height on them for a streetlight on the signal poles, about 35 feet
Okay.
is typically the height of those. So that kind of gives you a little bit.
The one on the right, all right, that light is how tall? 30, 35?
Those are,
Go ahead, Paul.
on the right there, those are actually traffic cameras, and so those are generally between 40 and 50 feet
All right, the
tall.
light itself, and
lights-
then there's something above it.
The lights are about 30
We should move
in the median. The lights located in the medians in those pictures are about 30. The traffic camera is about 40 to 50
And there is
feet.
only a camera on that pole.
That's all there is a
That is
camera.
just a camera.
Oh, that's not a light,
that's
that's not a,
That is a
No.
camera.
That's-
The ones on
oh, that looks like a light.
Yeah, no, that's a traffic camera that we use in the talk to monitor
Smile,
traffic.
Mark. You're on camera.
So, do we, go ahead.
Do you-
I just want to have staff clarify what your ability to say yes or no is and how this might play out. Some of this is existing authority, but there could be changes over time in terms of how federal regs work, et cetera. So I guess I want Sean or Vernon or both to answer. Can you just say no? Can you say yes with conditions? Or to what extent will this be something that might be thrust upon you anyway, and you're better to get in front of and have some regulations regulation in place. So talk about the thinking that's gone
I
into
will,
this.
and I'll let Shauna,
Can I ask you one question? When you just, I'm sorry, I came in late, but I've caught up a little bit.
Yeah.
When you said allowable in those areas, Vernon, when you speak to that, can you, when you say yes or no, can it be specific areas? Or when you
I
say
think that's,
yes,
yeah,
is it
both
yes to
generally
everything?
or in specific
Is
areas,
it,
yeah.
yes,
Commercial
you say
versus
no to a certain
residential or
area?
whatever.
Yeah.
I think that's part of refining that.
okay.
and very good questions, and that's why we're here to provide you feedback, and maybe we'll have to say we don't know and come back to you. But we do know that there can't be a regulation that prohibits wireless facilities, totally. Now, does that mean we can direct them on private property, keep them off public property, or keep them off particular areas or out of certain neighborhoods? I would think we'd have to look closer into that. I also want to say that when we started receiving requests, I contacted a couple progressive communities, Cary, North Carolina being one. They have elected not to regulate them, okay, except for making sure there were right-of-way permits and liability, certificates of liability insurance for any damage that was being done within the right-of-way, and that they were removed when they weren't being no longer used. I don't know if that's changed since that conversation a number of months ago, but that just is an example. Now, Cary, North Carolina is supposed to,
Right,
technology
yep, all technology.
triangle, and, they understand the advantages of that, as, we do too, but we want to maintain a certain aesthetic character of our community.
Are there
Far
other
away.
ways that we could be able to utilize these say they're putting a pole in that just strictly has the antenna on it? There are other ways that we envision that technology is coming that we might be able to utilize the same pole?
Well, not only poles, some pictures that we haven't shown you, but it's there's a possibility to put them on bus shelters, on other improvements within the right-of-way, that as this technology grows. So I've only illustrated we've only illustrated the poles of antennas and nodes, but certainly as you look at the opportunity to put them on buildings, maybe within parks, on some of our ball field lights, and encourage those types of installations. Hopefully we can work with the providers and the installers to ensure we're not adding to the visual pollution within the city with these types of devices.
One thing I was under the impression, there's obviously multiple carriers that are interested in providing this service. And so this isn't just one or two, there's 4 or 5 or 6 that long-term would be interested in it. And depending on the type of technology, depends on what they can do aesthetically with it, as Vernon stated, in a bus shelter or a trash can, or whether it needs to be on a pole or the exact height that they need. But I think establishing those requirements or regulations is what's critical to the long-term implementation.
I think putting these on existing poles would probably be all right, but if we bring in 40-foot poles in the right-of-way in existing residential areas, we may find some
But-
unhappy.
Well, as far as the plan development, yeah, what we've talked about, and I did mention it briefly, that if a provider believes that they need more coverage within an existing residential neighborhood, that we would ask that request to be considered by the Franklin Planning Commission. Because we really want to scrutinize those installations more so. Generally, the streetlights may be a little bit less taller in height in residential neighborhoods, and in many of our planned developments, those streetlights are unique unto the development itself. So putting a 40-foot monolithic pole would really stand out more so than you might see here in this environment.
A couple
So
of
Vernon,
things.
though, not all neighborhoods, residential neighborhoods are planned developments.
Right.
Do we need to put it in the context of
point.
planned unit developments, or can they be just residentially zoned?
Just residentially
Okay, all right,
zoned.
good. Those would all come to the
Yeah.
planning
Historic
commission.
zoning would all, if it's within the historic zoning overlay, it would come to historic zoning commission for approval.
Okay.
Alderman Peterson, and then I do want to take the opportunity, if it's okay with the board, to see if there's any of the audience that are providers that want to make some comments with their experience.
Okay, but first of all, you know, how far out does this serve? Do you see what I'm saying? What's the area of each one of these?
We should ask the.
We should ask
And
that.
it probably depends from carrier to carrier, the technology that they're implementing, but yeah, that's a good question.
Okay, and the other thing is, what does the carrier get out of it? I mean, obviously, they're not just doing this for fun.
Well, obviously, they expand their customer base, and I should have
So
mentioned.
customer, where do they get money out of it, is my question.
What I was going to say, that in this ordinance, we've proposed that the application fee would be $500 to allow for sufficient review with the criteria we have in the location, and then an annual fee of $100 per facility.
But I mean, where do they get the money out of it? That's what I'm asking. Where's the payoff for them to do it?
Ask them.
Absolutely.
So,
You mean $100 per pole?
who has a desire to speak briefly that are providers? So raise your hand. Well, just come on up. Both of you, those who raise their hands, come forward. I don't know, we'll find them.
Kelly Rogers with Crown Castle, so appreciate the time. So generally, just a couple of comments is that the providers, such as myself, we try to typically blend into the aesthetics of the community. So I know that there is a question about 40 feet, just depending on the neighborhood where we're going to deploy the technology, it would vary. And quite frankly, we look at street lights, we look at wooden poles, but we just try to minimize the visual impacts in every neighborhood. But one of the things that's really important to consider is that we're looking at solving the problem with not only coverage, but also capacity. So if you ever have an experience where you're using your phone, you're not able to upload a picture or experience a video. So with the high growth rates, it becomes a very important public policy tool. And so we're here to try to increase service from coverage perspective and also capacity and address some of the public safety concerns as well. So so a lot of times we use our infrastructure as multifunctional. So there is a question about shared infrastructure, so we try to promote shared infrastructure, and there's opportunities for the city to potentially use that as well for some of your initiatives. And so where I go across the country and represent, you know, a number of different providers, and one of the things to think about is the Smart Cities initiative. So as you start looking at building out your infrastructure in the future, try to monetize some of your existing infrastructure, better control data, better control information. Wireless technology is going to be important. And one other fact is right now, and just in terms of online, you know, applications, for example, people who have to apply for a job from McDonald's have to have broadband connectivity. So it's a very important public policy and economic development tool. And so we're here just trying to make sure we bring service to the community and make sure we address some of your growing needs of your population.
Well, I mean, excuse me, but where do you make money out of this?
We make money out of building the networks on behalf of our clients. So
But who
we-
pays you is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that's it. So so consider it like someone building a home. You hire a builder or a contractor, maybe not the best example, but they get paid for building the house for someone else.
So in other words, someone who wants to have this available for their customers, or, I mean, I'm
Wireless providers,
Yeah,
say
wireless, okay, yeah.
Verizon.
So wireless operators,
Okay.
you know, want to improve connectivity, capacity in neighborhoods.
And
And
you provide
So,
that.
but how, what I'm saying is, how do they get money out of it, though?
They have end users, like if you have a cell phone, T-Mobile, Verizon, everyone, all the major carriers are looking to increase capacity and coverage because of explosive mobile data rates across the country. And
The
interconnection.
federal guidelines recommend co-locating on towers, which means different services could have their equipment on the same tower. Will
Yeah.
that be the same case here?
Yeah, that's a correct. So just to be clear, there's a distinction between the regulation of towers in a traditional sense and a regulation of small cells, which are in the public right of way. But the concept is the same, as that you try to use shared infrastructure. So we don't want to have the proliferation of infrastructure. We want to best utilize the infrastructure that exists. So yes, co-location is a very important factor.
So would there be multiple arrays on the same
It depends.
Power?
Yeah,
or how does that work?
On a small cell facility, there could be, depending on the type of deployment we do, existing, multiple tenants on one piece of infrastructure. So in other words, there may be multiple operators using the same piece of infrastructure.
Is there a limit on how many can be on one tower?
I'm getting out of my depth here, but
Okay.
yeah, there's, RF issues, there's all kinds of things that are factored into that.
Where's the best example
Best example of what, sir?
Of an
of what you've
existing-
done?
Oh, we have infrastructure in Nashville, for example. So there's a lot of our infrastructure in Davidson County and Nashville. So, and we're building networks in Western Tennessee. So we're active across the state of Tennessee.
Yes, sir. You
Well,
want to,
could I, again, another question is, what area? I mean, what's your coverage area? You see, in other words, for one particular installation, what is the coverage area?
I think, were you representing Crown Council?
Yes, sir.
I don't know if this is on or not, but I'll speak.
Pull it up.
Pull it up.
Yeah,
All
there
right.
you go.
Normally, people don't have trouble hearing me. But my name is Tom Alexander, and I represent AT&T. So we're one of the wireless providers that these guys build towers. Let me change that. Build facilities. We're not talking towers here. We need to disconnect the notion of a tower with a small cell facility. The whole point of a small cell facility is to not put up another macro tower. We want to reduce that. We're trying to have densification so we can, and it will be in your urban areas. It won't be out in every neighborhood unless there's an intersection with just high usage. You've heard, there are different ways to accomplish this. There's called a DAS, D-A-S, a Distributed Area Antenna System. And you've got, like the Bridgestone Arena, different places where there are a lot of people concentrated for a short period of time. You want to have cellular service. I was told, and I think the gentleman back here was at the game the other night, at one of the playoff games, that his cell service worked great inside the arena. It did not work great outside the arena. So we need to fill in those gaps. What small cell does, you asked some questions, I'll try to answer them. Small cell is not the 2 to 3 mile radius that a macro tower does. Small cell is about 150 feet, 200 feet max, I think. My engineers are somewhere in that neighborhood, is that correct? Distance-wise? Quarter mile, there we go.
For connectivity?
For a small cell,
Oh,
for a
right.
small cell radius to do the signal. We're looking to take pressure off those macro towers, fill in coverage gaps, and have, in a dense area, we have needs. Now, huge benefits. You're asking where do we come in? Our customers need this service. Your citizens need this service. You need this service. It's all sorts of applications of the future. Smart metering for cities. You guys, Uber, anybody uses a smartphone is going to need this service. All sorts of applications that come in. And for the city, right here at City Hall, you guys want to have, a meeting and have a lot of people and people on their cell service that went to work. So this is going to enable us to not only relieve pressure on the macro towers and provide better service where you've got a dense area population, but it also prepares us for the network of the future. I don't know if you all are familiar with the evolution of the network, your phones. You remember, you've changed phones from time to time. It went 2G, 3G, 4G, LTE. Well, the next evolution is 5G. Small cells helps prepare for 5G. And this is all going to do that. So we're helping Franklin become a smart city, a prepared city, a connected city. And I can go over a whole laundry list. I've got handouts to tell you about the uses for this product. But I'm happy to address any other questions, but I do want to tell you, the work that your staff has done here is really good. It's a good ordinance. It's got, how to take this into consideration when we go put up small cell facilities. So keep small cell, you saw the light poles up there, different from a big macro tower. And I will say there are a couple of things here that are unique. One, you're served by Middle Tennessee Electric, am I saying it right? That's an electric co-op. And I think, if I remember correctly, that the city has let them take over your streetlights. Do they own those?
They own the streetlights and we lease them.
Okay. The one thing we would like to do is get on streetlights, traffic lights, and poles existing, so we don't have to put up another structure. These guys are fine with that too. We need to be able to locate on that. I think at present, Middle Tennessee Electric does not allow co-location on that, at least with AT&T. They may somebody else. So you have a little bit of an issue there about doing that. And you can co-locate some, just not, you can't have a proliferation of providers. There are a number of issues. He referred to RF, that stands for radio frequency. We have RF engineers that figure out which the way to send the signal where it works best to the broadest area. So we're
Will
trying to do
this
that.
just be related to cell phones?
Sir?
Will this just be related?
It'll be
cell
mobile
phone?
data. I mean, you'll be able to provide it over, you know, if you're using, you get into some questions about licensed and unlicensed airwaves and Wi-Fi. I mean, I'm sure your cable company and other providers in town you have hotspots and Wi-Fi and things like that around town. But there are a number of technologies that use the internet. You know, it's not just a cell phone. You can do it on this gentleman's got a laptop. I'm sure he's connected to the internet and using that. People carry iPads and, you know, other sources that connect wirelessly like that. So, anyway, just it is in preparation for the future. We want to keep our customers connected, citizens connected, and that's our plans. Happy
Alderman
to
Martin.
answer any other questions. It's being done elsewhere, as he mentioned.
Alderman Martin.
You mentioned that these were not to be very tall, they were just to take care of the gap between what we already have. All right. When we
Principally,
first started this discussion, you had two pictures up, and one was just a street light with, it looked like, well, no, not that. Well, I guess that is what you had, but it looked like just a little cylinder, just right
Oh, I know, the
there
very
on the
first
top.
Yeah.
And, you know, if
Point
that,
it there,
yeah,
there you go,
right
that
there
one.
on the left, right on the left
Those
there.
are the antenna.
Well, can you just get by with that on street lights?
Well, it depends on the location, if the street light's there, and sometimes the issue is you've got lights on top of a pole, and in that case, we might have to move the light and use two sides, put an arm, so you get the same broadcast of your light. and
I
put
just
the
think we
antenna
need to
up.
be really careful, and I don't want to see a 40-foot thing up in the air, you know, just so that people can talk on their phone.
Yeah, and you know, we went to a lot of extra
Um,
expense on Hillsborough.
I've got Alderman Berger.
Go ahead.
Sorry. My question is safety. How does this relate to most of the people are dumping their landlines and they were relying on their mobile phones? So having the connectivity is extremely important for safety features anymore. So how does this play into neighborhoods and people in the rural areas and people dumping their landlines? What can you speak to that?
Well,
Any
as
of
an
you?
AT&T, you know, we hope they don't, but we hope to get them on landline
They
and
are.
wireless.
They are.
Fully aware of that.
Fact.
I can give you specific numbers.
Yeah.
Yes, we are
Yeah,
aware.
we know that.
But the answer is it helps. I mean, otherwise, have you ever dialed your cell phone and not, bad term, you ever used your cell phone to connect and been unable, got a fast busy or anything where you can't get on the network?
Sure.
I mean, you want to have enough, you know, you gotta have both capacity and bandwidth and coverage. You gotta have all of those things working for this. And so, yes, this fills in. There are coverage problems, and that's what we're gonna try to resolve with small cell facilities. This, in dense areas, this alleviates putting up a large tower. I don't know if you have any towers downtown or not, the large kind, not a 40-foot pole, but a big macro tower with multiple providers on it.
You mean the kind you can decorate for Christmas trees?
Yes.
They're here.
I'm sure they are, I
Got
just
some of 'em.
didn't see them. But the idea being is exactly that. Yes, we need to provide greater capacity, more people can use the network. The real problem is, I don't have my specific numbers, but it's gone up by hundreds of thousands of percentage, the use. People, young kids, you know, don't have landlines. My children don't have landlines, and they're watching full video streaming on their cell phones.
Yep.
The bandwidth it takes to do all that is enormous. You have doctors sending radiology x-rays over this. So, I mean, I've looked at an x-ray on my phone. I mean, it can be done. You know, the technology is advancing rapidly. But for that, you know, the ability to stay connected, you got to have the facilities and the infrastructure. That's what Crown Castle does and what we're trying to do too.
Alderman Skinner, you have a question?
Right, we went to a lot of expense and different methods of getting things underground on Hillsborough that we're just working on now. I can't see us going back and allowing 40-foot poles to go up where we've gone to this much expense to put utilities underground.
Maybe that's a segue into allowing Roger from Middle Tennessee,
But if I could ask a question before we, which is related to Mike's, is, are these units wireless? Or you gotta run wire to them?
The facilities themselves will be connected with fiber optics.
Oh.
And they'll go back to a hub, and that will be, it can be underground. And I dare say, we have a lot of fiber underground. I don't have folks here to address that issue. In full disclosure, I'm one of the company lawyers. I'm not the engineer. at
Bless
all.
your heart.
This
Well, I'm
gentleman can
gonna
tell us about
allow
other
Middle
things.
Tennessee Electric to comment, and thanks for being
Yeah,
here.
absolutely. I'm Roger Jenkins with the engineering department with Middle Tennessee Electric. And we've been talking off and on with different people with this same request, Crown Castle. We've had discussions over the months about that. Appreciate your comments about co-location, and I'm glad for the opportunity to talk about that as well. We have a lot of concerns as far as just utilizing our existing primary poles, the poles that you see that hold the wire and transformers, in those areas of town where we have overhead facilities still, where it's not underground. There's some safety issues, some concerns with transfer, some concerns with how we can use that if it were on a utility pole, and Mr. Garth mentioned that earlier. And so we definitely recognize the importance and the future needs here. We want to do all we can to cooperate insofar as we can with whatever comes of this initiative. We see a lot of benefit in working with them in areas where the decorative poles, if there could be a solution, whatever the height requirement becomes, if there's a solution that works, that's a solution that we're happy to talk more about on co-location, any kind of solutions that we can give as a specification for a pole or a device that could house these, keep the clutter down as much as possible from an aesthetic point of view. But on our main lines, it's a concern for us with several factors as to why it would be a concern for the existing overhead facilities. And as far as the height goes, our standard lights, as you mentioned, they're on Hillsborough Road, those new teardrop lights. They're 30 to 35 feet that you'll see on the arterials. In the residential subdivisions, they're generally 16 feet is the most popular height. And like you said, most of them have that glass or some sort of head on top of the pole. So to fabricate something else would be a special device that would make it allowable to house a device like you mentioned just a moment ago. We're open to it. We'll be happy to provide power to that device and do what we can to, partner with whoever's requesting it for the sake of aesthetics and for, future communications. But, we'd have some concerns about existing utilities with the existing power poles.
Alderman Barnhill.
It's interesting. If you were looking at a 16-foot pole, you're not gonna put it on a 16-foot pole, are you?
Probably not.
Yeah, because you're not gonna get any coverage out of a 16-foot pole. So for us to be overly concerned about putting it on a residential 16-foot streetlight pole is probably not going to happen. Where you're gonna put it is someplace where you can get some height out of it and some coverage out of it. If it's on an existing 40-foot pole, then we're discussing what it looks like once it gets on the pole, because the pole's already there. So if it's one of those three units there, whatever, that's what we're looking at, is it not? But, and here's the other thing. This is a service for the citizens of Franklin. I would be interested to understand where the federal regulations come in to keep us from allowing this sort of service within the city. Because you know, and I think you may have addressed a little of that. Would you like to comment on that? Where? Now, I understand we probably could control our own polls, but
The FCC is really commenting and looking hard at small cells, and we're following that. So we don't have all the answers on how the federal regulations are going to address small cells just yet, but there's been some comment period, there's been some conversation about it. It's on the forefront of the FCC regulations. I think we will have regulations soon coming that will better address our small cells. So that's why we are trying to get ahead of it with our ordinance now, because if you look on the FCC's website, there's a lot of comments, there's a lot of comment periods, there's a lot of issues and guidelines already being addressed about small cells. And Tom, do you have,
Well, there are actually, as Shauna said, there are dockets open, they're considering it, they're using a word you guys won't like, but federal preemption. They're trying to have some standardized, because if you can imagine, just step over here on my side of the table. I mean, we're doing this in every local government area, and Nashville's got a set of rules, Franklin's got a set, everybody has rules. So the federal government's saying maybe this needs to be standardized, needs to have timetables, things like that. So it's out there. It's not been done yet, but, you know, among the things they're talking about are shot clocks and, you know, responsiveness and, so all that's out there, that's correct. As I started out, so far y'all have a very good proposed ordinance to deal with this. It protects you guys, it lets us come in and provide service to your citizens and our customers, including to the city.
All right. Could I ask a question about that particular one right there?
Sure.
The,
Then we're gonna let.
all right, on the left, that picture on the left, all of that stuff on that pole goes up to, I assume that is the small cell
It's an antenna.
antenna. All right. Is all that stuff on the side necessary for that antenna? Is it more on the pole than just that antenna?
To
Is
be
that
honest
your
with you,
stuff?
I'd have to, it looks like some electric meter box, and
Yeah.
I can't tell everything that's up there.
not
Could be some other issues, but we do have to have, these gentlemen here, we have to have power, and we have to have our fiber connection, so those two things.
Is
So
that
they're-
what you're saying, all that stuff's necessary?
I can't comment on that, so I'm not familiar
Well,
with that
but
design, but
there's
there
more-
are some
there's-
elements to
It's
have.
more than just a nice little cylinder
It
sitting up there on
depends.
top
So,
of it.
just to go back to a question you had, part of the things that we're exploring, we welcome the opportunity to partner with the electric company. And so decorative street lights is something that we've done a lot of places, especially in historic districts. So don't really get, hung up on the height requirement. I know you said that we'd be going to residential neighborhood and putting 40. No, we're trying to emphasize and reiterate, we're not trying to do that. We're trying to blend in aesthetics. So if it calls for us going to a historic area where it's only 15-foot height, we partner with you to figure out a way to give an ultimate solution to make sure we can get the coverage, but more importantly, to make sure we maintain the visual appearance within the historic area or any residential environment.
But the lower the unit, the lower the height, the greater the number of units.
No, not necessarily. So the
Okay.
good thing about our technology, it's gotten miniaturized, and you use the term densification. So we've gotten very sophisticated in terms of being able to get smaller antennas and equipment. And so that's why we're always emphasizing that we can find a solution to make sure that we can address the visual impact. So yeah, some of those technologies or some of the designs you see there are very antiquated in the sense that, that was when the technology was first coming out. Now we're seeing moving into LTE to 5G, and we're getting very sophisticated with the equipments and the radios to make sure that we can fit more in less space.
I would like to see, so you are in Nashville, and so there are some
Yes.
there are some current poles, current designs.
Oh yeah, we'd be more than willing
So
to share some
that's-
illustrations.
I would benefit by seeing what you just
Yeah.
put up recently,
Yeah.
and maybe trying to get some pictures on those.
Yeah, I mean, this is just a workshop on
Yeah.
this. We know it's a big change, we know it's a big deal, that's why we wanted to do it separate outside of a regular work session. It'll come back to you again, probably at another work session, and it will definitely have 2 readings, so this will be before you more times than just this. So whatever you think you need to look at or think about. If you want to see some FCC comments, I'm happy to print those out for you. Whatever you want to see, I'm happy to get. And as far as, this is dealing with in the public right-of-way.
Right.
If you guys just approved Envision Franklin, which allows buildings to go up to 12 stories, there is an opportunity that they could work privately and put something on top of a really tall building, if that's something that we needed to do, because we can have and will have down, at least through Cool Springs, some really tall
You
buildings.
step out your side door.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
that one too.
Well, one of the things I want to reiterate, so that's the reason why we're all here. As you're seeing this explosive growth, anytime you start planning these multi-unit developments or big housing developments, that's where you're going to see, he used the illustration earlier about capacity offloading. So the existing infrastructure is already at their max. It's just like when you're going on the highway and they open up a new lane, that all the traffic starts going over there. That's the same thing we're trying to do, is alleviate some of the congestion on the existing infrastructure.
All right, I'm gonna let Alderman Skinner give a 1-minute question, and then I'm gonna give it to Vernon, and then we're done.
Okay.
Because there's the potential for new poles in the public right-of-way that's not connected to Middle Tennessee, will there be a separate lease requirement for these? They're leasing space
No. So it's an
in the public.
application
Okay.
fee, because when they apply, it's gonna go through several process steps. We'll have streets involved, engineering involved, and we will have to draft a right-of-way use agreement with the city, and then go through the permitting process. So that encompasses that $500 permit fee. Then once they put
This
it,
is a $500 for the whole city.
for the application, right. And we haven't really talked about if there's a limit on how many poles they can put on one permit. Right now, we left it as one permit, and that encompasses the whole 500. If they put it on our poles, it's a $100 fee, but only so, it's a maintenance inspection fee, so we can go out every year, look at it, make sure it's, everything's working right, and that kind of thing. If they put up their own pole, there's no additional charge for that.
Okay, and I've got Vernon now. We're gonna be out here by 10 till, so make them quick.
Come to the mic, please.
So we can hear.
Just a couple concerns that in the future, maybe to think about. You answered the question about leasing it, but, my thought would be, are there any terms on this as far as limits?
3 years,
Okay, so every 3 years it would
a
have
new
to come
permit.
back up? Okay, and then another concern would be the, if you've got 4 or 5 different carriers, and you said it's first come, first served, but, so just whoever gets there first, are they the only ones, or is, because they said there can only be like maybe 2 or 3 to a pole, so, because if you're letting all 4 or 5, then you don't just have that one pole with 2 or 3 on it, then you're gonna have if you're trying to do all 4 or 5 carriers, then you're gonna have a whole lot of these, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So just a thought on how you decide who you let in and who you don't let in, and how many of these, are there gonna be?
Mhm. And I don't really know how competitive the companies are and the providers are with the same area. I don't know.
Well, the only comment I'll make is it's similar to real estate location. So they're going to look for where they can solve a specific problem. You mentioned the issue of buildings and so forth, like when you have these, downtown areas with multiple buildings being constrained. They're going to look for the options that are available that'll solve that problem. So it's based on radio frequency design. So that's where you see people more willing to co-locate and share existing infrastructure. So it's all going to be need specific.
I would just think that all the carriers are gonna want to be as heavily in there as possible.
I would tend to agree with that.
Okay, Vernon?
Well, that's
Close
right,
this up.
and respecting time, we're gonna come back to this, and I know that they're gonna be closely engaged with this, and we can move on. I really appreciate everybody's comments
Thank
and
you.
input, and we will continue forward.
What's the advantage of us deciding this before we get to FCC regulations?
Well, that's some of why we really are interested in doing it quickly, but we have providers that want to come in right now. I mean, they've been chomping at the bit for months, ready to move. And the holdup is we don't have a process and a review and an application and any mechanism for them to get in. So the deal is what we understand, the community needs it, the citizens need it, and the businesses are needing it, and they're telling them that they need it, and we don't have a mechanism right now. So that's really what we're trying to get done quickly.
I had accessed a white paper on the small cells, and it's called The Growth of Small Cells, white paper. And it's by Finley Engineering out of, I think, Nebraska. I'll email it to
You'll
everybody.
share it to everybody.
Yeah, I'll share it, because it's a really good white paper for information. I think will answer some of our questions.
All right,
And
we
let
gotta
me know if
quit.
you need anything else before we come back.
Meeting's
What other
over.
cities have already approved
Meeting's
it?
done. Everybody's gotta go down here to the next meeting.
That's right, we adjourn.
It's closer than 10 minutes.